Welcome, I'm Zoë Elton, and this is a program of Mill Valley Film Festival Contenders season and Mind the Gap. And I'm here in Oakland, California, which is the traditional territory of the Ohlone people. And I would like to welcome filmmaker Kelly Reichardt and writer Jon Raymond to our virtual space. Kelly, welcome back. And Jon, welcome.
Thanks.
It's great to have you both here. And Kelly and Jon are longtime collaborators on some of the true treasures of American cinema: Old Joy, Wendy and Lucy, Meek's Cutoff, Night Moves, and First Cow now, which for me has a very, very particular resonance because we were going to do a screening with Kelly last March after we'd been doing a retrospective of her work at the Rafael Film Center. And on March the 12th, we were due to show First Cow. Kelly was going to be at the theater. And gradually the walls started caving in on us. And I think, Kelly, what happened was, we realized that flying was not a good idea. And then we looked at Skyping, and then the whole thing, ultimately, I think that the date that we were going to show the film ultimately became the day that the theater closed. So it was quite a momentous, I feel like I'm getting a muscle memory of that time. Really, I think that places you, up front and center in the eye of the storm that was 2020, and really makes you, a part of this odd class of 2020 experience. But I would love to talk with you both initially about your collaborations, and particularly on writing, and thinking also for people who actually are writers, who are interested in how you hash out writing together, how you do that when one of you is also going to be directing and editing a film. Thinking back to Old Joy, which was the first thing you worked on together, were there ways of working that kind of got set for you at that point that have informed the way that you've worked together since?
Oh, right.
Not exactly. I mean, I can.
I did. Oh, sorry, Jon.
You can go. I have a thought.
We didn't know each other so much then.
Right.
And one of a possession I love is my email return that whenever I first wrote Jon and asked him if I could make a film out of this story, I think he wrote like, yeah, whatever. And it was like 4 words, like, but I think for me, my nutshell is I was working off Jon's story, and we really more got to know each other in the process of when I came to Portland and we started working on the movie, because that's like how we got to know each other, really.
Yeah.
At one point, Jon was like kind enough to read with someone else for the part, like it was. Anyway, I guess it's hard to sum things up, but beyond to say that to me, none of it's really been the same because it's whatever, we live close to each other and we're in constant conversation. But the thing that is the same for me is that the foundation and the seeds of the stories and the characters and the whole sort of foundation has either come from Jon's short stories, his novels, an idea, and I've never been faced with the blank page, and so I have nicely been able to be creative in the scripts by being able to work on this something that exists already that can be moved around or added to, but like the tree's been dragged into the room, and so that to me is yeah, that's the, so, you know, writing has many, to me, it's incredibly hard to explain what it all is because it's a day-to-day thing. But I, yeah, I mean, I feel like I come to Jon's stories. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. That's lovely. That's very sweet. I find also like that, I mean, like as Kelly is saying, like there's a pretty constant conversation going on, and like the ideas, I'll say, are born out of that conversation also. And like you know, I mean, I remember, yeah, going back to the old Joy thing, like, you know, Kelly read that story, which is, you know, for a story, it's fairly normal, you know. I mean, it's small character based, like naturalist kind of fiction, you know. There are like almost no directors I could think of that would see a feature film in that story and that would have, I mean, to me, the courage not to do that particular story, because it could have been any story, but that have the courage to kind of wield the apparatus of film, even in the smallest way. It's like it's a big project, and have it be devoted to such kinds of subtleties of character and kind of, you know, a certain kind of like human scale breadth, you know. And so I, like Kelly's right, like she's like, this sounds like a good thing to adapt. And I was like, all right, yeah, knock yourself out. I have no idea what you're gonna do. And like there was, you know, yeah, we started to get to know each other in the whole process. And like, I just began to realize, I'm like, oh, Kelly is a person of like incredible will, for one thing. Like, I mean, just, you know, amazing drive. And also just like incredibly immaculate taste, you know, I mean, really beautiful sensibilities, you know. And like, there was like
especially in choosing writers.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, also part of Kelly's thing is, part of Kelly, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean like choosing the writer. I meant in like the filmmaking, like in the like the way that the images are made, you know. And like, but it is, I mean, I'm lucky because Kelly works with like what's available, and I was like a writer that was kind of standing nearby, like at that time that she needed something.
That's not true.
That is kind of true, but like,
yeah, we met
okay.
through Todd Haynes. That's enough.
We met through time, yeah.
Well, that's pretty stellar right there.
That's smoke flowing. Mutual
good recommendation, right? But then when I saw what, you know, she had done with the story and like the images that she had come back with and the way that she was cutting it all together, like I will say, like that was the sort of moment where I'm like, okay, I get the assignment, you know, like I can like work to this in some way. Like I feel like there was like a recognition of the kind of breadth and the kind of composition and the kind of like, you know, voice that Kelly has. And so yeah, although so I've been able in some ways to, God, I hate the phrase lean into something. I'm not going to say lean
terrible.
into
Don't
something.
say that.
I'm
yeah.
specifically not saying the word lean into something. I'm saying I've allowed that sort of impression and that influence to kind of guide a lot of the, you know, the way that we're going to go.
It's not, it's whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm hearing you talk also just about the visual part of it, and you know, we'll come back to that. But if we fast forward then to First Cow, I mean, this has come from a book that is essentially epic in its scope, you know, both in terms of time and storylines and continents. And how did you choose and identify the string from the book that you wanted to follow for First Cow? And who got the ultimate decision in choosing it?
Choosing it, we've been talking about it for. It's the first thing I ever read of Jon's, and it just seemed too big to do. But it's always come back to the mulling over of like, how could we do it?
Yeah.
And things don't work so in such a straight way, right? Like
Right.
we started talking about, I mean, I think at different times we probably talked about, because the novel goes from contemporary times to 1820 and back. At other times we probably talked about just doing the contemporary parts.
I mean,
And I've been researching a film that didn't happen in a similar time period that's nothing at all like this, but in Europe. And it sort of didn't happen, but my headspace was still in, felt like I had done so much. I don't know. It just seemed, when we first started talking about it again, John, I think my first notes were of the contemporary side, but
well, yeah. I mean, I think we were.
To the other.
I
Yeah.
think there was like 3 conversations where we were kind of hashing it out in some way, and there was even like, can we split it or can we kind of throw them both together in some really like abbreviated form? Like I think that even was like tossed out there just in that sort of initial practical conversation. Like, okay, if we're going to do this, what would it be? But it took like probably about 15 minutes to figure out like, no, let's just make a decision and cast our lot with one of these lines. And I just feel like we both like found the old-timey one, whatever, more plausible. I mean, there are practicalities to it too, where it's like the old-timey stuff is in forests as opposed to like, seeing life out in the world, I mean, I think that probably fed into it to some degree, right? I mean,
well, yeah. Also, I think I was still in the headspace of wanting. I was been scouting villages in Slovakia for 2 years. I wanted to stay in the early 1800s kind of village life, but also a lot of the contemporary stuff. I think I hit a wall as soon as the girls talk about filmmaking a bit. There's like a whole filmmaking element to it, and yeah, so that to me also was a direction too. And I think that there are things that were contemporary ideas that seemed relevant in the beaver trade and the migration and all these sorts of themes.
Thematically, there's a lot that really speaks to, really the roots of where we've come from, but also things that keep cycling back. But let's come back to that. And just quickly, who chose the title? First Cow.
John.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true, but it was whatever. It was like a functional title that just like, yeah.
Okay.
But then you became obsessed with the word first for like a couple of months and it is a weird word, like when you look at it. But I think we often have titles that we think are temporary and then we end up
right. You come to know them well, right? By the time you try to name it.
Right. I mean, if you stare at the words "First Cow," it becomes a more interesting title than some people think. Like,
right, what does that mean?
And it's just a strange combination of vowels and consonants. Like you just don't see those particular like things together that much. But yeah, you have to stare at it for a while for it to really start to.
Right, word nerds will love that response, I'm sure. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the look of the film, because, Kelly, I feel that your work is so inherently cinema, capital C, it's so cinematic. And one of the roots of the look for this film, other than the Slovakian villages perhaps, were the paintings of Frederick Remington. We have a couple of pictures and we're going to bring a couple of them up. This one was particularly striking.
It's really about, the Remington paintings were really about color and these sort of blue greens, and often he has these kind of coral colored stars that keep showing up again and again in his night scenes. So it really was about the night scenes, and so these Remington became kind of the go-to color scheme for production designer Anthony Sparrow and April Napier, the costume designer, and Chris Blauvelt, the cinematographer. And we played with, there is some day for night in the film.
Right.
And these,
Yeah.
this one, well, you can see a little bit of the coral colors in the sky
Right.
here. It was really, yeah, it was really a color
A color
thing.
choice.
And how do the color of night and what the color of night would be.
That
And
was what I wanted to ask you about, because there are several scenes in the film that are shot at night, and I think that's one of the things that I feel about the film in terms of it being a cinema, you know, a film that you want to see in a cinema, essentially, because you want the enclosing darkness around you when you see it, and there's something that you get about I'm sorry, this is going to sound like the wrong phrase, shooting stars. It's like, how do you shoot a dark night?
Well, if you don't have any lights, it's really easy, and you're shooting outside. I mean, Chris Blauvelt is not afraid of darkness, and you know, the two of us together sometimes almost to a fault. And you know, we have color time things. I mean, nowadays it's becoming less of a gap. Just a film ago, you really had to decide, like, are you coloring for the theater or for what people will see at home?
Right.
And that gap is closing, but we always time for, we've, again, we keep trying to learn this lesson. Certainly in Night Moves, we went way too far in the darkness. If you know, it's too dark on your TV. And everyone sets their TV different, so it's a losing thing. But you know, you really can only control it for what happens in the theater.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, for one thing, just that Chris is not afraid of darkness, and so but I'm trying to think of our outside. You know, we work with fire a lot, and in this case was, you know, a lot of moonlight, that kind of thing. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was a crazy thing because, you know, we were gonna do some day for night, but, you know, we were shooting in the time of year where it becomes night really quickly, which is like, so it was kind of a dumb idea. So, you know, sometimes we're transferring into, there's just so many night scenes.
Right.
But Remington gave us like a lovely guide into just, yeah, just thinking about what colors come up at night and what we would go for in the brush and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. Let's take a look at just one other picture as well, which is a daytime picture, and maybe just, you know, talk us through a little bit about what a picture of this nature tells you in terms of what you're looking for in the choices that you make in location. And then also maybe, you know, are you looking for texture? Are you looking for light?
I mean, this is more, there were other artists, you know, like this is kind of literal. Like I didn't really refer to him for these sort of things, but like looking at this picture, like you see the, like that purple in the background,
right,
of the sky,
yeah,
you know, like in the yellow, like if you went into the chief factor's house, for example, those colors, the kind of purple, orange colors is how, you know, we set the colors for the house inside.
yeah.
But I didn't go to Remington for these sort of literal,
for that literal thing.
things. Yeah, it was really much more the color of night that
yeah, that which is a very striking part of the film, I think, the color of night. Yeah, yeah. Kelly, how does knowing that you're likely going to be editing your film also inform the choices you make when you're writing with Jon? And Jon, have you come to understand the nature of, you know, what will essentially be edited in film through working with Kelly, as opposed to editing on the page?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, a script is an outline, really, you know, and I think the scripts, you know, with Kelly are particularly like spacious in some ways. Like, I mean, I've come to understand that like there'll be dilations in, you know, certain moments, certain kinds of sequences. And I don't know that it's like altered the writing that much, but I've at least understood that like that's going to happen, and that will be an interesting thing, that like there will be yeah, like possibly some people would read the script and not understand that like there's going to be much more air in there, you know.
Right.
But you know, I mean, a script is also only, like Kelly's talking about with the paintings, I mean, a script is only one form of communicating, you know, how this whole thing is going to happen. So like, you know, I mean, Kelly has a lot of visual references, and, you know, we have other literary references. There's so many parts of the conversation. The script is like an important part, but it's like one of many strands of conversation.
Right.
But I think there's things that just that it's not the way or like say the way you write about nature, or you write about there's things to me that I'm trying to figure out how to like when I'll end up in the editing room sometimes, and I'll feel a moment of like, oh yeah, that's what Jon was getting at. And it feels like but something that wouldn't necessarily be a direct line that you'd go, it's more, I realize just because I don't read that, when I read other scripts, I realize like, oh, I guess we allow ourselves like the idea that of having, you know, just that there's actual writing in in your descriptions and stuff like that, that's things that add a kind of it's more ambiguous, but it helps the actors, and it helps me, and it helps it's more of a vibe, I guess. And it's nice when that resurfaces and you go like, oh, okay, that survived to here, and that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm talking about like the things that are grounded in prose and paragraphs, you know, I mean, there is like, I mean, in writing paragraphs, there is like a continuous breath you have to keep, you know, and there is a kind of, those kinds of rhythms are more possible. Like, I mean, a script is such a weird like object, you know? So, I mean, I think what you're talking about is like going back to like actual paragraphs, as opposed to like thinking about prose more than like the script object, maybe.
Me, what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
like it's
It was fascinating to me when you know, a friend recently wrote her first screenplay from a novel that she'd written, and it's just that you know, that taking something that you've written and imagined in one form and then taking it into another is kind of a fascinating thing. But I think one of the things that I'm loving essentially in the writing and conceiving of the film, at moments like at the beginning, that segue from the boat and the river and the bones, and then the mushrooms. I mean, it's like the segue to the picking of the mushrooms, and that very, you know, that very specific, intimate detail. I kind of love that.
Thanks. That's well, I was just gonna say I mean, it's nice for the actors. They've both said that having a novel to go to just gave them a lot of, you know, that if it was a novel to, you know, there's just like more depth that you could get into than you could get in a script. But just speaking of that opening passage, that just is a little homage to the filmmaker Peter Hutton, who things of him, his filmmaking, you know, definitely it's thinking of references and influence and stuff, you know. Anyway, that opening is a little homage to the American filmmaker Peter Hutton.
Great.
Yeah.
as another moment for me, the first time I saw it, it was like, oh, that's interesting. But it was the fishing scene. So I come from a rural background in England. My parents had the local pub, and the local poachers would go off and poach fish, trout specifically, and they would tickle trout, which meant that they would go down to the stream. They would put their hand under the stream, or when the trout come by, they literally tickle it, and it gets completely mesmerized, and then go whoop, and they get it out of the water.
That's cool.
So watching him fish sort of brought up this muscle memory, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, the stream is going downstream, and he seems to be like going with the stream as opposed to wouldn't he want to be like downstream and have the fish flow into it? But he actually caught the fish. So was that just cinematic magic that he caught something, or or what was that like from behind the screen, the scenes?
That's not the happiest story, but
you mean many fish died in the making of this scene?
No, well, those fish, they're on their they know when the last day of those fish are, because they're gonna spawn and die. So right. They're salmon. But that was all coordinated through Neil Kopp. The producer Neil Kopp was in charge of the fish, and I'm sure lost many a night's sleep over the fish. But there's a little, there's some movie magic going on.
Okay.
But even in that, Magaro got so excited.
Yeah, exactly.
About the fish, which were, planted in a fenced off area, and he immediately caught the fish and looked at me and Chris Blauvelt right towards the camera, like as if he was so proud of him for catching this fish, which you're like, that's a half-dead fish. In a well-stocked stream. Like, okay, but yeah, that's
okay.
And the fish all go back with the caretakers.
Oh, that's very sweet. That's very sweet. So you didn't have to train them or anything.
No.
Another thing I was thinking about, just sort of with this project being kind of like the class of 2020 filmmakers, is that I feel like looking at the film now, I see it through slightly different eyes, in as much as I think many of us have been much more drawn to growing food, cooking, getting back to getting to the roots of what it is to be a human being. And I wanted to thank you for the oily cakes, and also that we got the recipe from your folks, and we will make that available to people. So we're hoping that the oily cakes recipe will be inspiring a few cooking sessions here in California. And I guess, again, just sort of thinking about, sort of like one last thought, thinking about really where we've come from and through 2020. Have you considered how, or even whether 2020 will change the way that we write or conceive or make movies and cinema? And you kind of alluded to it a little bit when you were talking about shooting darkness and thinking about whether you're shooting it for somebody's TV screen or for a cinema screen. But any other things that have sort of come up front and center for you this year? Too many, right?
Yeah. John?
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't have a big answer on that. I mean, if the question is like, are people going to go back into theaters? I think that it's just too good to stop doing. Like, we like to go sit in a room with other people and watch a projected image. It's not. I think watching TV at your home just doesn't do it. So I'm not worried about that. And yeah, but and really, yeah, I mean, for the fundamental of all of it, like, no, it's not going to change how people write or make movies and think about stuff. I mean, it's new stuff to process, and it like changes like how we're thinking about the current moment, and that's always like a big part of our process, you know, is trying to understand like what you want to say at a given moment. You know, I mean, that's part of what has allowed, I feel like, our conversation to evolve, is like we're interested in politics and history, and we like want to be involved in that conversation. And like, so in some weird way, 2020 will like play out, but not like in any kind of like predictable way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing what you can, I will say, I mean, I want our films to be shown in a theater.
Right.
But I have quite, it is amazing what you can just see in your house. I mean,
Right.
I mean, I just revisited the Lucretia Martel films.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
you know, just to be able to say, okay, this week I'm going to see all her films. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I finally caught up with The Souvenir and The Square, 2 movies I've really enjoyed, both of them so much. And, you know, it's just amazing what you can, I mean, on certain platforms, whatever, I just feel like I'm in a mall and I can't like decide, and then I get exhausted by looking. But the good old Criterion channel really lets you just easily like fall into seeing. So, you know, I really, you know, we're always thinking about the film as a projected, and of course it was very disappointing when theaters closed on our opening week, but no buts about it. That was just, and you know, being in your house for a year, it has been nice to be able to, you know, watch movies that I, you know, that you would imagine you could see.
That actually, yeah, I feel like there is, you know, there are hidden bonuses to this pandemic lifestyle that we're having to become accustomed to. I know I kind of feel like I want both of your playlists in terms of your movie playlist. You've given us some hints there, I think that would be great. One last question. Would you prefer to direct a dog or a cow?
A dog.
Okay.
You can't really direct a cow, but yes. You direct a crew around the cow, and you know, the crew falls in line with the cow. But yeah,
I can see that. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you for prevailing, and thank you for all the work that you've done. And thank you also for First Cow. It's really great.
Thanks. Zoe, stay safe there.
Thank you. You too. Yeah. Yeah. Be well.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah.